Welcome to another conversation from the Virtual Valley, our community of writers online readings and interview series meant to keep us together during this period of challenges, political and pandemic. Our aim is to affirm the profound importance of the wider literary community, solidarity and support, and of course, to celebrate the work of members of our immediate workshop community celebrating 51 years this summer. I'm Andrew Tonkovich, editor of the Santa Monica Review, both a past participant and a staffer at the community of writers. Thanks to Brett Hall-Jones, Laura Howard, and Eva Melas for supporting, producing, and engineering this modest contribution to the big lineup of resources available on our Community of Writers website. Today, I'm so pleased to speak with two friends of the Community of Writers, generous literary pals whose expertise and insights will be helpful to both readers and writers, especially those reading, subscribing to, and submitting to literary magazines. As editors with considerable experience, Laura Cogan and David Yulin will help me to review, investigate, and explain their own work, and perhaps explore the current literary landscape. They need no introductions, except that I don't want to miss the chance to encourage or invite them to elaborate on their impressive CVs. Laura Cogan has since 2010 served as editor-in-chief of one of the nation's outstanding literary journals. Based in San Francisco, Zizova is celebrating its own big anniversary, and under Cogan and Oscar Villon's leadership, has recently put out its Los Angeles edition of the journal. It's a defining or redefining perspective on LA from Bay Area editors featuring both new and familiar writers, including poets Victoria Chang and David Hernandez, fiction by a guy named Ray Bradbury, as well as Michelle Latiolais and Seal Ju, and wait for it, a nonfiction writer named David Yulin. Indeed, Yulin's work overlaps with Laura's, by which I mean his work overlaps with just about everybody's. He's the former books editor for the LA Times. He's a teacher, anthology editor, prose writer, and founding editor of the journal Air Light, that's air/light, whose second online edition is up now. This is a regionally focused project highlighting writing of new authors with a special focus on historically underrepresented voices. Wonderfully, friends, as we shall discover, Cogan and Yulin share a commitment to encouraging a multiplicity of voices and, yes, supporting writers and the tradition of literary magazine publishing. No surprise there. I could go on, but the best way to learn more, besides watching the three of us talk for the next half hour or so, is to immediately subscribe to both Zizova and Airlight, purchase David's newest, the Library of America series collection, Joan Didion, the 1960s and 70s, and indeed follow up wherever you like on the contributions both of my guests have made. Hey friends, thanks for doing this. How about that for a flattering introduction, huh?
That was wonderful. Thank you so much. Glad to be here, and glad to be here with you, Laura.
Very generous. Thank you, Andrew. And I'm delighted to be here with both of you.
It's probably a dumb question, but I assume you know each other, you've worked together, but let's use that as an opportunity, starting with Laura, to let you explain to our community of writers and the wider viewers where Zizova came from, how you became its editor-in-chief, and what makes you such a great editor-in-chief.
Well, thank you, Andrew. So Zizova was founded in 1985, and I stepped in with Oscar Villon in 2011, I guess. So we've been the team running the journal for a while now. And it's a really special place. We feel very honored to have stewardship of such a long-standing literary journal. And in fact, part of the way that our LA issue came about was it sort of grew out of thinking about our 35th anniversary. And when we were starting to think about our 35th anniversary, which was in 2020, this was back in 2018, 2019, we were thinking about it. We thought one really beautiful way to sort of start the celebration would be to publish a Bay Area issue and sort of really thank the place that had been the journal's home and roots and foundation since day one. And so we did that. We published a Bay Area issue in winter of 2019. And the idea was always that it would eventually be paired with an LA issue. And so that's where that sort of came from. And we published the LA issue and I guess winter of last year amid the pandemic, which felt like a feat in and of itself, but was also a really wonderful project to have to focus ourselves during all that turmoil. And I think the two of them kind of, the idea is that they would sort of work together in a really robust way to celebrate the extraordinary wealth of talent that's here in California, but also specifically in these two cities that really have such an interesting relationship with each other.
Nice. Thanks so much for the kind of overview. David, I had a kind of a wonderful short personal conversation with you a few weeks ago, and I was so charmed by the fact that you, a guy who's sort of achieved every accolade that a person can have in the literary life, nonetheless sort of confessed to me that what you had secretly been wanting to be all along is the editor of a small literary journal. That's really sweet, but why is that so meaningful?
Well, I mean, I had done it with a friend, and I caution anyone who's thinking about doing this with a friend because it was it blew up the friendship. But I had done this with a friend in my 20s and early 30s. We'd put out 3 issues of a journal, and I've always loved the collaborative. I'm a writer who also is an editor, or a editor who's also a writer. I love the solitary nature of writing. I like sitting in the room and wrestling with a piece myself. But I love the collaborative aspect of editing. I always kind of have the analogy I often use is it's, one is painting and one is making collage. And I love the kind of community collage aspects of editing. I like the serendipity. I like the unexpected. I love discovering a writer I didn't know, or discovering some amazing piece of writing that, comes in over the transom that you could never have possibly anticipated. And I also, I have, my inner young writer is very active in me in the sense that I remember very well what it was like not to be able to get published. And so I'm very interested in the communitarian aspect of literary journals as well, of kind of creating I don't know what I want to call it. It comes creating a playground for writers and artists to sort of do their own work, do the work they want to do. One of the rules we sort of developed for ourselves early when we were conceptualizing Airlight was that we wanted to be we wanted to be in collaboration with the contributors and be responsive to what they wanted. We were asking people, what's the piece you've never been able to get, that no one's ever been interested in? What's the thing you really want to do that no one's given you the opportunity to do? So all of those factors have come into play. I also think that, shockingly, Southern California is a vibrant literary landscape with a vibrant literary history that often gets short shrift outside of Southern California or even within Southern California. And I, perhaps selfishly wanted Southern California to have some kind of journal like this. We have in the past, I was an editor at large for Black Clock, Steve Erickson's magazine, for many years, which is one of my favorite literary journals. But it seems like there is a gap in Southern California literary production or literary culture. And so I wanted to I've been thinking for a long time about the idea of a journal that wouldn't be about Southern California, but would kind of speak from Southern California, right? And a national journal based in Southern California with a Southern California point of view or perspective, which is a different perspective and a different aesthetic than perhaps aesthetics of other places. So I wanted it to reflect place in a kind of broadly aesthetic way rather than as a kind of fixed subject in some sense.
Nice. We've talked about aesthetics and audience and tradition and ambitions, but keeping in mind that this show that we're putting on today will probably indeed be watched by a lot of aspiring, submitting, continuing, committed writers. Let's talk a little bit about the sort of political economy of the journal. Your 2 journals are quite different, notwithstanding your excellent good taste and motives and all that. So maybe we could start with Laura and then go back to David. Your magazine is so impressive because it has ads, has a huge readership, seems to have support from the business and civic community, and is able to maybe integrate a larger audience without a, say, academic institutional backing. Whereas I think, David, you have a relationship with an important Southern California university, USC. So Laura, kudos, of course. I'm always impressed by the distribution of Zizova and how much your Bay Area community wants to booster the magazine.
I'm impressed as well, and honestly honored by the support, and how, even if in real numbers it's a relatively small number of people, but we do have the support we have from those people, and how strongly they seem to feel about the journal. It's very heartening. And coming out of last year, it's a really interesting time to talk about this, because I had, on the publishing side, sort of spent years at the journal trying to build up our distribution and earned income and ads and all this, and really to see that take a very hard hit last year. I mean, all of those things were, the rug was just taken out from under us. And so it was really special and encouraging to see the way that small donors stepped up for us last year in particular. And of course, the larger donors are very important as well, but we know we can recover on those earned income streams, but in the meantime, to see how much people cared really helped us morale wise push through. And it just can't be overstated.
Beautiful. So not to belabor the point, but you are an independent journal that's supported by sponsors, advertisers, and big donors, which is just, it's pretty rare out there. And it is impressive. David, can you talk about your relationship to a very supportive institution, which has, I guess, given you, power, carte blanche, some resources to create Airlight?
Well, yeah, Airlight is published under the auspices of the English department at USC, where I teach, and is part of a kind of, I guess I would describe a kind of integrated publishing program in the department. The USC English department has, among other things, a PhD program, both a critical track and a creative writing track. And for a number of years, there have been two sort of micro presses that are operated out of the PhD program. One is called Goldmine Press, the other is called Ricochet Editions, which are staffed by PhD students. And there had been a literary journal at USC, the Southern California Anthology, which then became the Southern California Review, which was shut down, I think, in 2015 or 16, when the Masters of Professional Writing program closed. It was published out of that program. There had been a desire at the university to have another literary journal. And when I came on as faculty, which was in 2016, we started having conversations about what such a journal might look like. We do have institutional support. We are, which is quite remarkable. And we do have a kind of commitment, a long-term commitment to the journal. And so we are operating in a kind of middle ground. I mean, we're not publishing students. We are in the process of developing in fact, we're in the process of really, we're hoping to launch this in the next couple of months, a kind of an associate editor level, which would be populated by creative writing PhD students. So there is a kind of a pedagogical function in some aspect to the production and publishing side of what we're doing, which connects also with the presses. I feel very strongly that we're not doing graduate students in creative writing any favors by not teaching them about the kind of business side of publishing, whether in terms of getting their own work out into the marketplace, or what it's like to be an editor, or what it takes to put a publication together. I think that these are all really important aspects of kind of a three-dimensional literary and writing and editing life. So I'm quite enthusiastic about that idea, about working with young editors, and even we have undergraduate interns who are helping us read Slush, and those are really fascinating conversations. But but also I think in terms of focus, I think we're very, very much aligned with what Laura and Zizova is doing, which is to say we're looking for the best work that comes to us, and we're looking to put together issues that make sense as issues. We are, we haven't done a theme issue yet, although we certainly will at some point. But we do want the issues to cohere as a kind of, as an organic collage narrative of sorts, let's say. And so one of the challenges for us has been, since we're a digital journal, how do we do that in the digital realm? We don't want to just do a data dump 3 times or 4 times a year and say, here's the whole issue, and then have the site just sort of remain static. The solution that we've come up with is to announce the issue at the beginning of a cycle, publish the entire table of contents, and then roll out the pieces 2 or 3 at a time over the course of 10, 11, 12 weeks. And then at the end of that process, we design or put together a downloadable PDF of the issue if you want to read it as a kind of integrated issue. For me, one of the really exciting aspects of that is it's allowed us to get into a lot of multimedia work, which I was sort of I think abstractedly expecting, but I wasn't, being a kind of technophobe or Luddite myself a little bit. I wasn't aware of quite how exciting that working on that kind of material, or kind of trying to build that kind of material, was going to be. And so we're doing, so that's been a fascinating kind of, I don't know, expansive territory for us, I suppose.
Hey, thanks. And it is a very handsome online production with beautiful graphics. I confess to being so old school that I actually printed out the first issue, and that works too.
I have it on my iPad, and I kind of sometimes look at it as as like a full issue, because I love both. It's actually a great it's great to be able to work in both the kind of immediacy of the web, but that kind of I don't know, the durability of a quarterly.
Well, thanks to both of you for answering what could have been my tedious question about what writers actually should know about a journal before they submit to it, because everything that both of you just said would make a difference in expectation and behavior and reading time and publication date to somebody who was trying to get their work out there, or who was investigating what a good literary journal looks like. And now's your chance to embrace one of the many hats that you folks both wear as, I'll call you cultural workers, because I'd like you to brag a little bit about this LA focus, this Southern California focus that both of you have very explicitly addressed. So I have my hard copy issue right here of the gorgeous, this is what it looks like, folks, the gorgeous Los Angeles edition of number 30, sorry, of the winter number 119 edition of Zizova. And just because I'm a geek, I read all the fiction pieces first, like in one setting, partly because there's such an obvious, Laura, editorial effort to make sense, as David just said. So you start off with Ray Bradbury. Thanks for that. Why don't you tell us a little bit about how you got to these writers, and maybe highlight a few of them, Laura, that you'd like us to think about in terms of your mission?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, maybe if I can just take the broad view for a second first. I sometimes it feels like we're in a little bit of an awkward position as editors of a journal based in San Francisco, because we're acutely aware that there's a long history, I think, of West Coast authors being, I think, somewhat overlooked, or slower to be, it's the critical and publishing establishment is slower to recognize, let's say, the quality of the work. So on the one hand, California has this embarrassment of riches in terms of writers, to the extent that it almost feels like bragging if you start listing all the amazing contemporary writers who are here. But on the other hand, you have this history of, again, the critical and publishing establishment being slower to recognize, and those writers in the meantime, I think, struggling more than they should have to. So fundamentally, what we as a literary journal want to do is to try to choose some voices that we think are really important, and expedite this process of recognition for them if we can, right? And that could be writers at any stage of their career. This is certainly for emerging writers. You want to try to help them get their first publications, to get the ball rolling toward their first collection or their first contact with an agent. But even for writers who are more established, I mean, even if you've published a book, that doesn't mean, okay, you're set, everyone's interested in what you're going to do next. They need constant support. And so that's another major factor behind us doing first a Bay Area issue and then an LA issue. And then in Los Angeles, you also have this interesting thing that, David was alluding to, where I think there's a misperception that LA is a very familiar place to us. The sort of national cultural imagination thinks it knows LA because it's so widely, if not well, represented in TV and film. And I think that's deceptive because there's a lot more to the culture there. And certainly, the three of us and probably many people listening to this know that there's a major literary culture there, but that may not be as well known as it really should be. And so that was part of why it felt really important to do an LA issue. It turned out to be our longest issue ever, which I'm very proud of. And to be honest, there was additional work we would have loved to accept, but freight being what it is, we had to draw the line somewhere. So yeah, I think it's a really special issue. We have, starting off the issue with Ray Bradbury felt really fun, and that story feels very prescient and creepy and interesting in that way. And we have work from writers who are established, like Michelle Latiolais, that I think I always am hoping will reach a broader and broader audience. Works by emerging writers like Jonathan Escoffrey, who I think is really exciting, a wonderful short story by him that doesn't pull its punches. It's really a knockout. And I think too, one of the things I'm proud of about the issue is that we didn't go in the direction of trying to ignore Hollywood. We have some pieces in there that either overtly or underneath the surface are dealing with what it's like to write for TV or film. The interview with Wanda Coleman, I think, is really special. Steve Reifel did a great job with that, and she's since passed away. And I think many of us are looking for any work and remnants of her voice that we can find, because she was so singular. And she talks a little bit about writing for TV. And in addition, we have this essay from Tom Bissell about the tortuous and perhaps inadvisable process of bringing Nabokov's Lolita to film. So there's that. And then we also have underneath the surface people like Perry Janes, who is an emerging fiction writer that we published in the issue. His story is not remotely about Hollywood, but he's someone who is also thinking about film quite a bit and interested in it. And he just had a great interview in the Los Angeles Review of Books talking about his overlapping genres of interest. So it's underneath the surface and it's in the background. And then there's wonderful poetry by Victoria Chang, who I'm a great fan of as well, and Mary Otis, and I could go on, but that's a few things.
Nice. I challenge anyone to resist buying a copy or subscribing to the issue. I really appreciate that. And thanks for name checking our friends at the Los Angeles Review of Books, because I mean, not to overstate it, but a lot of people are aiming and hitting the same mark, except they're sort of doing it in different and beautiful ways. And that's part of the joy of being a reader, is to pick up one journal, see somebody's name, and then pick it up again, a different journal, and see their name again, and suddenly realize, oh, I need to get this person's upcoming collection. And David, this is your chance to jump in and talk about maybe a couple of writers you've boosted. One of whom is all over the place now. Caribbean, who that's exactly what happened to me. I got my LARB, then I got my Airlight, and then all of a sudden she's everywhere. Can you maybe introduce her a little bit and,
sure.
And then do your thing?
Yeah, before I do that, I just want to say I was so happy to see that interview with Wanda Coleman, because I think, I mean, I've said this before, but I'll say it again. I think Wanda is really is the key, right? She's the most significant literary figure in Southern California, post-war literary figure in Southern California, in terms of coming up from within the community and, writing about the city as a real space. I mean, when I first got here, she and Carolyn C. basically taught me how to be a Los Angeles writer. And her death was a gigantic loss. What a magnificent writer, and what a generous human being and soul. So I just want to say that was one of the highlights of the Los Angeles issue for me, because it brought her back for a little bit, and her voice is still so important. As far as we are, how would I put it? We're very much aware of our kind of relationship with other institutions in the ecosystem. So another literary institution in California that I feel a deep affinity for, and published my first book, is City Lights. And so, and I was interested in Caribbean Fergosa's book before it came out, because I'd been aware of her work and I knew about her work editing Boom. I think she and Romeo Guzman have been doing a great job with Boom, another California institution.
which is UC Press, which you're also affiliated with.
So, and I was really curious. I got a galley of the book, before it came out. I read the book, and the hardest part about that particular selection was choosing one story. I would have, if in a different kind of magazine, I would have tried to buy the serial rights to 3 or 4 and published a kind of suite of stories. But it was, I was glad that we were able to kind of showcase that work, because I do think, the book is all over the place now, and deservedly so. It's a remarkable collection, and maybe more so because it's the first collection. But the idea of again, as I said, we're not only looking for local writers, but we are looking for we're looking for writers across the board who we feel we want to and need to be and deserve to be showcased. And she's a remarkable. That story is brilliant. The book is fantastic. I can't speak highly enough about what she's doing on the page, the lines she's blurring, the kind of, the deep emotional work, but also the kind of aspects of magical realism and how they all sort of tie together into this kind of coherent sense of danger and wonder and all kinds of, it's remarkable work. So that was we were really happy. We published that piece early in the first cycle. Other pieces that we've published that I really love are Vicky Bertiz's essay, Little Earthquakes. Lynn Melnick, a New York writer who grew up in Southern California, wrote this phenomenal kind of prose poemy essay called An Essay About Roger. We published an excerpt from an upcoming, or the second issue, we published an essay from an upcoming, I hesitate to call it a memoir. It's a kind of genre blurry book, but I think it is a memoir by Elizabeth Crane, called This Story Will Change, which is just a beautiful kind of fragmentary narrative about a marriage falling apart, and asking all of these open-ended questions. The pieces that I'm most responsive, we also published some poems by Victoria. And I want to say too that another writer who actually ends up in both journals is Wendy C Ortiz, who who wrote for us a kind of, our relationship to Hollywood is a little different because we're really close to it, but I'm not, but I'm interested in it, and and it certainly is an influence. And for our first issue, Wendy wrote basically a pandemic TV journal for us, and used and wrote an essay that grew out of what she was watching on television, and ended up becoming this incredibly interesting meditation on James Gandolfini and The Sopranos, which she was rewatching. And that's a kind of a great example of a certain kind of airlight piece where we just sort of said, go, do what, go take that, follow that trail where it takes you. We do a lot of editing, or we don't always do a lot of editing, but with, in the case of certain pieces that we commission, we want the writer to kind of just put everything into the first draft, and then we work with the writer to hone it. That was a piece that we did, Wendy and I kind of did a bunch of work on, and it was that also for me, one of the great pleasures of being an editor is that collaborative, one-on-one collaboration where we are kind of, we're both sort of sitting there with the piece in between us, in this case, virtually in between us, and kind of thinking about what it is. And so there's something really fascinating about that aspect. The other thing, just quickly, I want to talk about is, going back to that multimedia idea. In the first issue, I had seen a show about 3 years ago at Cal Arts, a dance piece choreographed by a choreographer named Andre Tyson, that Douglas Kearney had written and performed the libretto for. And so we were able to basically publish the film, the video of the performance, the actual 28-minute dance performance with Doug performing the libretto, as well as publishing the text of the libretto just as a poem in its own right. And then we did a podcast interview where I talked to both Andre and Doug about the genesis of the piece. that's one of the great things I think about when the online environment is that we can do all of this kind of work that would be impossible for us to do in a print journal. And so that there's something really fascinating about the idea of being able to publish or quote unquote publish a dance performance as part of a literary journal. It kind of creates a liminality that I want both in terms of traditional genre and also in terms of all of these other disciplines. We published a piece of music in the second issue, a recording of a piece of music in the second issue. We're going to do another recording in either the third or fourth issue. In fact, we have a meeting later today to make final decisions on that. So it's, there's a kind of fluidity that feels right to me in some way, or natural to me, I suppose.
Thanks, David. Yeah, we've all had to vigorously embrace the multi-form kind of platforms. And I don't want to overlook that, Laura, that Zizova has responded the same too. So, I mean, if people go to your website there, you've also tried to take advantage of the multiplicity of ways to engage the writing. And maybe as we wrap this up, you could talk a little bit about your newsletters, your other, genres for expressing the Zizova vision.
Yeah, well, I'd love to say first that, David, I'm just so impressed with what Airlight's doing, and it's sort of a breath of fresh air, the way that you guys are looking at how to use, how a journal can be, how it can be handed out to the public. I love the schedule that you've created. I think that's really smart, and also helps. One thing we're constantly thinking about is how can we make sure that we're getting our material to our audience, to our readers, amid all this noise. And so I think the schedule you guys have come up with is really smart. And I love that it does end with a PDF that you can download if you want. And I also really like everything you've done to sort of embrace the all kinds of different genres and forms. And I think that's a really smart direction for a journal to go online. That makes a lot of sense. It's making really good use of the technology. On our side, we've come a long way over the course of the time that Oscar and I have been running the journal. But it's a constant work in progress. And what happened last year definitely pushed us to try to make some changes really quickly. And I think we did a pretty good job of that. We were also lucky that we had just redone our website. It had just launched, and the new website just launched, I think that January, basically, which was fortunate. It's a more robust site, it's more responsive, all of which was very helpful. But yeah, we had to make all the kinds of changes that you would imagine. We had to move our workshops online, and we did all those things. And we did, the events online and with different partners, partnered with different independent bookstores, partnered with Lockdown Lit at Lunch to specifically help support authors publishing a book into the pandemic, which is a really tough situation to be in. And I think all of that, went really well. I think, one of the advantages of being a small organization is that we are pretty nimble. Our resources are limited, but we are really nimble. There's not a lot of bureaucracy for us to deal with. If we decide we want to try to do something, we can try to do it pretty quickly. And that's always kind of satisfying. That said, there's a lot more to figure out, and we don't know exactly when we'll be able to go back to in-person, events, fundraising events, workshops. So we want to continue trying to find ways to make these events and these ways of finding community as rewarding for people as possible. And it's tricky because I think all of us are a little bit Zoom fatigued, but at the same time, we really need the community. I think that the isolation that people are dealing with is profound, and it's unhealthy, and it's a little scary. And so I don't know exactly what it'll look like in the future, but we're going to try to keep figuring out ways to make sure that people can feel connected to a literary community through Zizova.
Yeah. Really like what you're doing with the studio. I think that's that's a great innovation. I've been enjoying the material there so much.
Thank you. Yes, I probably should have mentioned that we launched Zizova Studio, which is the subscribers only portion of the website, where we're publishing new material on there every month to try to help people feel connected to us in between issues.
Yes, I follow the the icon of the little weevil every time it pops up on my screen.
I as well.
You two have been terrifically generous, and of course, a little bit of promotion for the community of writers. Both Ziziva and Airlight and their representatives and boosters will be, of course, participating in this summer's online Community of Writers conference, for which we are very grateful. Viewers, please do check out the Ziziva and Airlight websites. Subscribe by all means. And for more videos, including these Voices from the Virtual Valley presentations, visit our own Community of Writers website. David and Laura, thank you so much. We really appreciate it. Good to see both of you.
Thank
you
you.
both.
And thank you, Laura, for all your kind words about Airlight.
Oh, I love it. It's terrific.
Thanks.
Okay.